Hello and welcome to the Inside California Housing Laws educational video series. The topic of this video is going to be the ABCs of ADUs, learning some basics to familiarize yourself with California's state ADU laws and how to navigate them. My name is Tyler Galley with HCD's Housing Accountability Unit, and I will be guiding you through this introductory course. First, though, a short disclaimer. This video is for informational purposes only, and while HCD makes an effort to provide the most accurate and up-to-date application of these laws, the information and interpretations made in this video do not hold the weight of law and may change over time. The goal of this video is to inform you about some ADU basics, including how ADUs and JADUs are defined, some important terminology that is used by the state and local laws and what those terms mean, the benefits of ADUs and some brief statistics surrounding them, HCD's role in the application of state ADU law, a high-level overview of the permitting process, and finally some common pitfalls both for applicants and for local jurisdictions. First off, what are ADUs and JADUs? They've been called many things over the years, from in-law units, granny flats, secondary units, and backyard cottages, to the currently defined accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units. These terms are defined in Government Code Section 66313. An accessory dwelling unit is defined as an attached or detached residential dwelling unit that provides complete, independent living facilities for one or more persons and is located on a lot with a proposed or existing primary residence. An ADU shall include permanent provisions for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitation on the same parcel as the single-family or multifamily dwelling is or will be situated. ADUs also include efficiency units and manufactured homes, which are separately defined. Finally, ADUs may be either single-family or multifamily. JADUs are defined as a unit that is no more than 500 square feet of interior livable space and size and contained entirely within a single-family residence. A junior accessory dwelling unit may include separate sanitation facilities, that is, a bathroom, or may share those sanitation facilities with the existing structure. It's important to note here that JADUs are not a subclass of ADUs, but rather a separate and distinct type of dwelling unit. Now, let's look at some other important terms that you'll see throughout state ADU law. The first term we'll go over is attached. As it relates to state ADU law, an attached ADU is one that is or will be structurally connected to the existing or proposed primary dwelling. This may be beside it, on top of it, or even below it, but it must be a direct connection. In other words, the ADU is not connected to the primary dwelling by things like patios, carports, fencing, and things of that nature. A detached ADU, then, is one that does not have that structural connection. Ultimately, they are still constructed on the same lot as the existing or proposed primary dwelling, but are physically separated from one another. This includes, but is not limited to, a separation by a clear, open space, as well as non-structural connections such as utilities. Next up, we've got two terms that I just used, existing and proposed. For the purposes of state ADU law, an existing structure is one that is physically present on the lot. That is, it physically exists as the intended use. Existing structures may be permitted, but they may also be unpermitted. State ADU law calls out 3 different types of existing structures: existing primary dwellings, existing ADUs, and existing accessory structures such as garages or carports. A proposed structure is one that is the subject of a permit application and which meets the requirements for permitting. When going through the permitting process, a structure is generally considered to be proposed until it receives a certificate of occupancy. Here are some very similar terms, which are separately defined. State ADU law sometimes uses similar terms that mean different things, so it's important to keep in mind which one is being used and when. Livable space is space within a dwelling intended for human habitation. That includes spaces for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitation. This term is used most often when determining the allowable size of ADUs and JADUs. Living area is the interior habitable area of a dwelling, which includes areas like basements and attics, but does not include accessory structures like garages or carports. A local agency is defined in state ADU law as a city, county, or city and county, whether they are general law or chartered. However, a permitting agency is any entity that is involved in the review of a permit for an accessory dwelling unit or junior accessory dwelling unit, and for which there is no substitute. So that includes, but is not limited to, planning departments, building departments, utilities, and other special districts. One notable exclusion here is homeowners associations, or HOAs, which are not part of the permitting process for ADUs under state ADU law. These next terms have to do with the processing of your ADU application and what a local agency or permitting agency may apply to ADUs. Ministerial review refers to the review of an application which involves no discretionary decisions. Ministerial reviews are not subject to hearings, such as from local planning commission, and must contain only objective criteria. Objective standards are defined as standards that involve no personal or subjective judgment by a public official and are uniformly verifiable by reference to an external and uniform benchmark. Objective standards are also required to be available and knowable by both the applicant and the public official prior to submittal. There will be some examples of what is and is not an objective standard closer to the end of this video. The last 2 terms apply to the number of dwelling units within a dwelling structure. A single-family dwelling is a dwelling structure which includes a singular unit on a lot. That leaves just about every other kind of dwelling to be considered a multifamily dwelling. Duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and apartments all fall under multifamily. However, more than one separate single-family dwelling on a lot is not multifamily. That's just multiple dwellings, all of which are single-family. With some of the basic terms and definitions out of the way, let's talk about the practicality of ADUs, their benefits, and some of their contributions to housing availability over the years. One of the most common reasons people look at building, buying, or renting an ADU is affordability. State ADU law encourages ADUs that are often, but not always, smaller than the surrounding homes, using space where development has already occurred. New laws surrounding the separate sale of ADUs have made them an affordable option in many high-cost areas around the state. This gives interested homebuyers a more affordable option than newly built homes in the same areas. While it is not a requirement, many local agencies look to ADUs as a way to fulfill their commitments to provide affordable housing through incentives on ADUs that have affordability built into deed restrictions as well. It will differ from place to place, but those looking to buy or build an ADU, it may be worth looking at whether or not the local agency has any bonus programs or incentives for affordable ADU development. Another common use for ADUs is intergenerational housing. As families grow, change, and pass through those big life milestones, ADUs can provide a more independent arrangement for homeowners and their family members. Consider, for example, those who are looking to move their aging relatives somewhere nearby, children who have come of age and need a living space while attending college, or a home for a live-in caretaker. ADUs can serve a purpose for all of these situations and more, providing those who need it with independence without being too far away. On this slide, I'd like to look at two benefits with multiple meanings: equity and accessibility. ADUs provide equity in the social sense in their ability to expand upon the housing options for those who are often otherwise priced out of having a choice. ADUs are a safe and relatively affordable option for people with disabilities, seniors, and low-income families. In addition, ADUs provide equity in the financial sense in that their homeowners can add relatively affordable living spaces on their property. ADUs provide long-term home and land value, and many homeowners use ADUs as an extra source of income by renting them out as well. With regard to ADU accessibility, I mentioned that ADUs are often used in housing for seniors in part because they offer an extra degree of independence. They're constructed to modern building standards and may be intentionally designed for aging in place. These universal design elements are more feasible at the scale of an ADU. As for accessibility in the social sense, ADUs are generally more attainable for a wider variety of needs. While they're often limited to smaller units, that is not always the case. ADUs allow for individuals to stay in their communities, for jobs, families, or other needs, and year over year, the increase in ADU development becomes apparent. So let's talk about some community benefits. ADUs have become a major part of California's new housing supply. They've increased density through already developed areas which don't often see much new high-density housing. In doing so, existing communities see an increase in housing stock and affordable options. As for sustainable development, since ADUs are constructed to modern code requirements, they provide refreshed construction and design elements in the available housing wherever they are built, meaning older, established neighborhoods see more new housing options. From a land use perspective, ADUs offer a more efficient use of existing neighborhoods, preventing urban sprawl. They're mostly built in infill lots, that is, lots that already have some residential development, including utilities and infrastructure. They add homes without expanding outward, and ADUs as new housing stock also bring renewed interest to local businesses and promote local job growth as a result. Year over year, the number of ADUs constructed in California has increased substantially. According to recorded APR data looking back to 2015, fewer than 1,300 ADUs were permitted statewide. As ADU legislation was updated, with substantial updates occurring almost annually, ADU production increased. As a result of these increases and the benefits offered by small-scale development of ADUs, that legislation progressively became more permissive. Over the span of just a few short years, the legislature has removed barriers to ADU development across the state, including fee exemption, review processes, and local development standards, which often make the permitting process for housing development between local agencies differ considerably from one another. As of 2024, ADU development accounts for roughly a quarter of all residential development throughout the state of California, and that growth hasn't stopped yet. ADUs continue to grow in popularity and become even more accessible. How does HCD fit into all of this? There are a wide range of mechanisms that HCD uses to play their part in ADU development, but they can be fit into two primary roles: enforcement and technical assistance. On the enforcement side, HCD has the authority through state law to act on violations of state ADU law. As for technical assistance, the department provides all stakeholders from homeowners, contractors, and developers to local agencies and other government entities with assistance related to state ADU law. We'll get into each type. First up, enforcement. The first and most direct method of enforcement that HCD uses is through reviews of local ADU ordinances. Local agencies are required to submit adopted ordinances to HCD, at which time they may be reviewed. If that review reveals inconsistencies with state ADU law, then the local agency will receive a letter requesting revisions. The ordinance submission and responses to these letters have strict deadlines spelled out in state ADU law, and in rare cases will result in escalation to the Attorney General's office. Other kinds of enforcement letters include technical assistance letters, notices of potential violation, and notices of violation. These types of enforcement letters are more often seen with other state housing laws, but they are also utilized for the enforcement of state ADU law. In the image here, there is a dashboard on the HCD website that has the letters that have been sent to local agencies where they're searchable and can even be filtered by the letter type. One important note here is that the goal is always compliance with state law, and issues with local agencies rarely need to be escalated because changes are typically made quickly and without the need for further enforcement, while the local agency adheres to state ADU law in the interim. The goal is always compliance, ensuring that each local agency is applying state ADU law correctly and consistently across the state. That brings us to the other role that HCD plays: technical assistance. HCD provides technical assistance to all stakeholders, meaning that a homeowner or developer has the same capacity to submit a question, concern, or complaint as any local government does. HCD's technical assistance portal offers a way to connect with someone within the department who can provide guidance on all facets of state ADU law, helping stakeholders understand and apply the law correctly, no matter the application. There are also other technical assistance documents HCD has published or supported, such as the ADU Handbook, which provides an explanation of many frequently asked questions and a legislative history of how ADU law has changed over the years. Finally, HCD also provides resources from other entities involved in ADU development, such as CAL FIRE and the California Coastal Commission, to further explain how other laws and regulations interact with state ADU law. With that, it is time to shift gears and talk about the permitting process. One of the largest strengths of state ADU law is the consistency it applies to the permitting process as a whole, but you'll notice that HCD wasn't a part of those processes in HCD's role. In California, the permitting process generally takes place entirely between the permitting agency and the applicant. ADU law provides for a ministerial review process without public hearings or discretionary decisions, and limits the kind of objective standards that can be applied to ADU development. Here we have a very high-level flowchart of the permitting process. Every permitting agency should have something like this, and most will go into more detail about their specific process. However, the permitting process typically follows a very similar pattern, so let's talk about it. Everything begins with submitting the application to begin with. The local agency will determine whether or not the application is complete or incomplete. If it's incomplete, they'll provide a list of items for completeness and require resubmittal. If the application is complete, then it will move forward for review. Likewise, during review, the permitting agency will determine whether or not the application meets all of the requirements for permitting. If not, the denial must be in writing and must include a written list of all deficiencies. Like with the initial submittal, an applicant will be able to resubmit once corrections have been made. If the review is approved, then once all permitting agencies have approved the application, the permit can be issued. Once that happens, the applicant is free to start construction. Don't worry if plans change during construction and inspections. Plan addendums and amendments can be submitted during the construction phase, subject to the same review and approval. Once the final inspection has been completed, the certificate of occupancy can be issued. This is the final step in the process, where the ADU has been confirmed to meet building standards and is safe to occupy. From this point forward, the ADU is a fully permitted dwelling. Now, the permitting agency has specific timelines to perform their own activities in order to keep ADU permit times as short as possible. For that first portion, the application completeness, the permitting agency has 15 business days to determine whether or not the application is complete. As mentioned before, anytime a permit application is sent back, the applicant must be provided with a written list of incomplete items, which they may then address and resubmit. As for the formal review, ADU applications must be ministerially reviewed within 60 calendar days, which starts at the same time as the 15 business days in the first step. That means that there is a maximum of 60 days in total to get through this step. If the application does not meet the requirements for permitting and is denied, then the permitting agency must provide a written correction notice within that time. The applicant may make these corrections and resubmit without submitting an all-new application. It's important to note here that the clock resets with each denial, so each resubmittal starts over at a 60-day calendar. Now that we've talked over the ADU permitting process, let's look at some of the most common pitfalls that cause confusion and delays. Both applicants and public agency staff are prone to mistakes and misunderstandings in ADU law for different reasons. Starting with local agencies, one of the most common things that local agencies will get mixed up is how many units must be allowed on a lot. That number differs based on a lot of factors, and the most important one is whether or not the primary dwelling is single-family or multifamily. Beyond that, it has to do with the configuration of units. For a detailed description of the total allowable units, the ADU handbook is a great resource, which breaks that down. Earlier, I mentioned that state ADU law changes almost every year, and that does lead to local agencies having out-of-date ADU ordinances. The way state ADU law is written, older ordinances become non-compliant over time because they do not meet the requirements imposed every new year. One of the clearest examples of this is when local ordinances reference old code citations. In 2024, state ADU law was rechaptered within an all-new chapter within the government code. As far as standards that local agencies often apply incorrectly, remember these standards need to be objective, ministerial, and cannot be more restrictive than those found in state ADU law. Overly restrictive standards like ADU size, height, number of stories, setbacks, and parking requirements, or exemptions are common compliance issues that are found in ADU ordinances. Similarly, subjective standards are identified in ADU ordinances often. Standards that compare and contrast but don't give exact details, such as compatible or architecturally similar or neighborhood aesthetic, are examples of subjective terms. Here are some of the more common mistakes and misunderstandings by applicants. First and foremost, code compliance is a big deal. With only a few exceptions, state ADU law is mostly silent on building codes. So local codes will still apply, including the local adoption of building, residential, fire, and energy codes, among others. Even where ADUs do have exceptions in the building codes, they're not necessarily treated as though they already meet those requirements. The requirements just won't apply. This is also true for unpermitted ADUs and JADUs. While state ADU law does prohibit local agencies from imposing certain fees, as well as some newer code requirements on unpermitted ADUs, these structures are still subject to the permitting processes described earlier. Exemptions won't apply to unpermitted ADUs which are deemed substandard due to health and safety concerns, or which were built after January 1st, 2020. Looking at the last of the applicant pitfalls, there are some important conditions that exist outside of property lines. Special geographic conditions may impact your permitting or ADU requirements. Special construction methods and other permitting agencies may be required within those areas as well. ADUs proposed within very high fire hazard severity zones, the coastal zone, or flood hazard areas will likely be impacted, and it's best if applicants are aware of these additional requirements prior to beginning the permitting process. Utilities are also a source of confusion for many applicants because they're often separate permitting agencies altogether, have separate fee structures, and their own lists of requirements. In addition to that, utilities may require costly off-site improvements to provide for ADUs. The legislature and HCD have both used state ADU law to simplify these processes and prevent overly burdensome utility connection fees in some cases, but applicants should still be aware of any additional requirements from utility providers. To close out this introduction to ADUs, here are a few key points to be aware of. ADUs and JADUs provide a number of benefits to homeowners as well as communities. They're increasing in popularity each year, adding new housing stock to new and established neighborhoods alike. State ADU law is changing frequently, with new bills being passed almost every year. These changes offer additional clarity to local agencies and applicants, as well as further encourage the safe and affordable development of ADUs and JADUs statewide. HCD's Housing Accountability Unit plays a part in the enforcement of state ADU law and provides technical assistance, which is available to everyone. However, the department is not usually involved in the permitting of ADUs, even when acting in these roles. Ultimately, the permitting process for ADUs is between the permitting agencies and the applicants. And that is why it is so critical for applicants and permitting agencies to have clear communication with one another throughout the process. ADUs are an extremely valuable tool for housing development statewide, and understanding state ADU law can help make the goals of Californians into reality. Thanks for watching this episode of the Inside California Housing Laws video series. I hope you've enjoyed this video and have a better understanding of ADU basics as a result.